In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. S Praznikom. One of the aspects of the writings of St. Paisios, and I highly recommend the writings of St. Paisios, the Athonite, particularly has, I believe it's 5 books that were published by the monastery of Soroti, or the monastery in Soroti, and these are all about the spiritual life, and particularly I recommend everyone always read the book on family life. I think it's actually called like Marriage and Family Life. It's one of the most excellent books on this matter, written from a saint, and obviously a contemporary saint of the 20th century, so this helps as well. Well, one of the aspects of St. Paisios that was so pronounced in his writing was the emphasis on spiritual laws. You know, we know that there are physical laws. We know that there are kind of, you could say, economic laws. But then there's also these spiritual laws. And this is because all of creation is made by the hand of God. And the formation of it is from his very character. And so everything in creation has these similarities or these observable principles and laws that kind of govern different things, right? I mean, it's just like... it's kind of like if you invest poorly for a whole year and you're down X amount, like you're not going to turn that around in 6 months. Likewise, if you eat poorly and don't exercise for a year, right, and go back to the gym, you're not going to turn that around in 6 months. Likewise, if you're negligent in going to church and praying and fasting and all these things, and you come back to church, you're not going to turn that around in 6 months, right? So there's a parallel I often find in all of these different disciplines of life. You know, you have financial, you have physical, you have spiritual, you know, in all of these ways there's these kind of guidelines that are true. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, I often use the analogy of the stock market, because the stock market, I think, is one of those kind of, I don't know, excellent kind of just analogies. You know, when you see a stock that is doing really well, you know, it's not a single trajectory, right? But over a long period of time, you see that it's trending upward, but there's ups and downs and ups and downs. I often relate that to marriage. You know, a good marriage is one that's trending in the right direction. It's not, you know, perfect every single day, 7 out of 7 days, it's like the best, right? But it's an investment that you're putting time and energy and work and communication, all these things into, because you have it on an upward trajectory and you're reaping the benefit of that. And it's the same thing with lifting weights. You know, you don't always lift weights. It doesn't always go well. You don't always feel your strongest, etc., etc. But when you look at yourself over the course of a year, you see that you're making progress. So likewise, in today's gospel, we see one of these spiritual laws and one of these spiritual principles in the feeding of the 5,000. And the spiritual principle, or you could say the spiritual law, I think those terms are kind of interchangeable, is that you see the Lord teaching the apostles that when you take care of other people and when you're generous, you will be taken care of. And it's simple like that. Now, I think this principle or this law has been misconstrued in the West. And you kind of hear this in kind of the prosperity gospel nonsense that's preached. You know, like if you give to God, he'll give you 100-fold. You know, if you tithe, then you're going to get something back, all these different things. And it's like you will get something back. In fact, even in St. John Chrysostom's time, obviously, since the beginning of time, basically, there's always been investing. And people would ask St. John Chrysostom, what's the best, or he writes, I believe it's in one of his homilies, he says, the best investment is to put your money into the belly of the poor, because this reaps a return into all of eternity. You know, if you bought Apple stock in 1986, right, and you're like, oh, what would it be worth today? But you die in 1987, that's the end of the investment, right? But you feed the poor, you take care of those in need, you're generous, you give back to God. And the principle for that has always kind of been, just so that we understand, has always been the fact that the people have always given the money to the church, and the church has distributed that money as it was needed. In fact, I remember doing a calculation, I believe it was on it was St. John Chrysostom, and how many, the modern day equivalent, but it was something with St. John Chrysostom. It was an astronomical amount of money. I believe it was like $1 million a month in current currency that would pass through his hands every month. Like, that's how much money people would like be giving him, like $10,000 at a time, and then he would just distribute it to the poor. He would find somebody who needed it, and the money was constantly going through his hands. And in fact, there's a story, I think it's St. John Chrysostom, where somebody hands him like a bag, and I think it has like gold coins in it or something. He doesn't even open the bag, and somebody walks up and is like, I can't feed my family or something, and he hands that person the bag. And the person who handed him the bag said, do you know how much money was in that? And he was like, I don't know, and I don't care. Basically, he just handed it on. That was what he did. He was just guided by the Holy Spirit in this way. Always, always, always taking care of the poor and the needy. But the spiritual principle being in place that when we take care of those around us, when we are faithful to God, God is faithful to us. This is why we often ask for his blessing, right? Even in today's gospel, they bless the food before they ate it, right? Which is a principle for us that we should always ask God, right, to bless the food before we eat it. I often find that it's an interesting conundrum. Occasionally I'll hear from somebody and they'll say, oh, I can't make it to X. I can't make it to liturgy on Sunday because I have a test on Monday and I have to study for it. And you immediately think, can God's blessing be upon that? No. Why not? Why can't God's blessing be upon it? Well, because God's not a micromanager. God doesn't micromanage our life and tell us what he tells us what to do in a general sense. It's our job to fulfill that. Now, if we choose not to do it, right? Like if I come in and my kid is like making pancakes in the morning, which is a terrifying thought, but let's think that he's trying to make pancakes, and I say, hey, do you want my help, right? Which is, do you want the blessing of your Father to help you to accomplish this? And he says, no, I've got this figured out. It's like, we may be eating something at the end, but I don't know if it's going to be pancakes, And this is how God is. This is the spiritual law. When we take care of God, when we're faithful to God, God is faithful to us. He sees that we're putting it in his hands. This is like people hear me emphasize the idea of tithing, of giving 10% as a biblical concept since the earliest times. In fact, really for the Christian, the goal is even more than a tithe. The tithing was the Old Testament, and Christ says, unless your righteousness surpass that of the Jews, ye cannot be saved. Right? So the whole idea, even of giving 10%, is an Old Testament concept. Really the New Testament concept is to give quite a bit more than 10%. But the point is that even when we do this, we're taking the money that God has entrusted to our care, and we're being faithful by giving back to him out of what he has given to us. And in this way, we show him, hey, I am not Lord of my own bank account. I am not king of my money. You are king and Lord of my entire life, and I entrust you with what you have given to me to do rightly with it. This is how God behaves, right? God gives us, in a sense, he gives us enough rope to potentially hang ourselves, right? Or he gives us enough rope that we're able to make it into paradise. It depends on how we utilize that rope. Do we use the good things to acquire more virtue? Let's say somebody's, they're not making a lot of money, and they say, oh, well, I can't tithe. But then they go away and they pray to God, God, I want to make more money, or I want to be successful, or I need this, I need that. Because of the nature of God, he doesn't micromanage us. But at the same time, if somebody says, hey, I need to hold on to that which you're asking of me, God, but now I'm going to turn around and ask you to bless it and to give me more, it's kind of a conundrum. Right? Why ask God for more when we're not faithful with what he's given to us? And this is the same with our time and our energy and our talents and all these different things. Likewise, the person who's faithful in these things, when difficulties and trials and unexpected things happen, they can very easily turn to God and say, Lord, I have been faithful with that which you have given me. Things have not come to fruition as I expected them to be. Please take care of this as you have always taken care of everything. And of course, God sees the person's faithfulness and blesses them. This is the spiritual law that is at play. When we take care of God and when we're faithful and when we're obedient, God is faithful to us. When we say, you know, God, I know you have a plan and an idea and a decision and a direction for my life, but just pump the brakes on that real quick because I've got other stuff to do, then what does God do? He doesn't throw a temper tantrum. He doesn't nag us. He doesn't berate us. He doesn't do any of that. He says, okay, take care of it. You know, let's see what happens with that. And this is so often the case with people, and it happens in all types of areas of life. Their finances, their health, their children, their marriages, all these different aspects of our life. If we are merely faithful to that which God has called us to be, God will be faithful to us and take care of and work it out. Now we have to understand that God's faithfulness, right, is within the concept of His understanding and His blessing. We ask Him to bless the work of our hands. We ask Him to help us. But we don't have these expectations that, like, you know, hey, if I tithe every year, God's going to make me a millionaire or something. It's like, no. I'm going to tithe every year. I'm going to give generously. And God is going to determine the right course for my life. As the Holy Fathers say, God makes the rich and the poor every single day. He guides us and He directs us and He guards us. We should not have false expectations that somehow God owes us something. In fact, in the loaves and the fishes today, right? The whole end point of it is that everyone got to eat. That was it. There was no conversation about what they were eating the next day, right? Like, we don't know if that was enough food for like a couple days and yada, yada, yada. We've talked about this before in the sermons, which is this concept of being in the present and being in the one day at a time and looking for today. We know that God took care of them, and that was it. Now I want to touch on one other point along with this, because this is the Holy Fathers talk about, which is this pertains to hospitality. You know, there's a concept, or you could say there's a principle that we see, and we talked about this last Sunday in the sayings of the Desert Fathers, where you would have very righteous husbands and wives that sometimes the monks would encounter, and they would ask them, how do you live? And it was interesting, there's a constant theme. They would say, we give 1/3 of our money to the poor, we show hospitality with 1/3, and we live on 1/3. Now, unless you're making buku bucks in our current culture and society, this is pretty much not possible, right? But the concept of hospitality being something that is key to the formation of the Christian life. And I was thinking about, I was preparing this homily, Ruth and I were talking about this recently, that when we were in our mid-20s, and we had been married about 5 years at the time, and our marriage was okay, but struggling, but okay. We had a husband and wife, a man that I worked for, who showed us this incredible hospitality. And they would invite us over to their house all the time to spend time with them and their kids and to eat meals with them. And I had a job with him, and so many times after work I would hang around their house and they would cook for us. And in this way they began to talk to us about Christian marriage and the principles of Christian marriage and what that looks like and the duties of a husband and the duties of a wife. And it was all natural and organic, and through their love for us, they began to instill in us an understanding of marriage that was way beyond anything that we had previously known. And in fact, just by being around them, we could see their love and affection for each other. Both of us coming from, divorced families, neither one of us had grown up with loving parents. We had never seen it. We had never seen a really good, healthy marriage. And they were able to show that to us just by opening up their house to us. In fact, so much that I think I was working for him a year at the time or so, and he said, we had our anniversary was coming up. I think it was like a Friday or a Saturday or something. And he said, what are you guys going to do for your anniversary? And I think we were married like 5 or 6 years at the time. And I said, I don't know. We don't really have any money. We're just kind of doing a staycation. We had just kind of finished college. We had moved back to California. We didn't really have much money. I said, we're just going to kind of do a staycation and take like Friday off and have a long weekend and maybe go out to eat a couple times or something like this. Like normal, not much. And he said, okay. Then within 48 hours or so, he called me and he said, hey, I booked you 2 nights at a resort in Palm Springs that I like to go to for you and your wife, and swing by the office. The office manager has like an envelope with, I don't know what it was, like $300 cash in it. Go have a wonderful anniversary. And it rocked me to the core, that this person had shown all this love and had nourished our marriage and taken care of us through this generosity. And I worked for him. What did he know about us? That we were young, that we're in our 20s, that we're we were probably blowing our money on frivolous things frequently, that we weren't that we weren't making much, and we were just kind of living sustenance and all this other things. And he could have been like, these knuckleheads, he could have even just ignored it. He could have just ignored it, right? But instead, he said, here's all this money. Go enjoy your marriage. Go enjoy the marriage that God has given you. Go out to eat and have fun together. These little things, these tangible Christian things. Now, and I'll tell you this, after that, if this man had told me anything about marriage, what would I have done? I would have done exactly what he told me. I would have believed him, right? Because he had shown me all this love. He had been generous with me. He had been kind with me. I knew that he had my best intentions in mind. Nobody else had shown me this type of love. In fact, even there were times when I was working for him, and again, we didn't have much. I remember one time we went on a service call. It was the end of the day, and we had done a bunch of service calls, and it had been a very profitable day. And I can't remember what I was making at the time, like $15 an hour or something like that. And we went to the last service call, and we knocked it out. And I can't remember what all happened. But he said, we got back in the service truck, and he goes, check out the check. And I looked at it, I'm like, wow, $250. Like, we hit a bunch of service calls that day. We had done really well. And I said, wow, $250. I'm like, that's great, He goes, no, look at the check. And I looked, and it had my name on it. And he was like, this is your bonus. He's like, you're doing a good job, or something like this. And I was like almost in tears, because I was like, nobody has ever shown me this type of generosity in my life. Nobody has ever been this kind to me or taken care of me in this way. It's such an interesting concept that we see this in the lives of the saints, this generosity, taking care of people, passing on what we have, having people over to our house. If there was one thing I could encourage people in the church to do, it would be have other people over to your house. Especially when people are older, to invite people that are younger over. Especially older married couples, to invite younger married couples over. To hand on the principles and the life of being a Christian. To show hospitality. To show love. To show a family. To show what it is to have children and to raise them. And all these different things. Because the Christian faith is handed on like this. Like hand to hand, tangible. In a very real way. It's not in books. It's not just in stories. But it's in the real way that we interact and we love one another. And we're kind and we're generous to each other. No one should ever come to the Orthodox Church and think, wow, we kind of just show up for liturgy and then we disperse. Then there's nothing else. There's no deeper ties or bonds that are holding us together. They should have that sense that there's a real love and an intimacy and an interconnectedness within the church, and that there's a real handing on and a helping one another. You know, people that are older, that are successful, should be teaching younger people in the church the principles of being successful, the things to do in life, and how to do it. Sometimes people forget that, like, you know, some of us who come to the church never learned any of these things growing up. You know, didn't learn any of these things growing up. And the only formation that we have is within the church. And so it is in these simple ways of being generous and taking care of people and living by the principles that God has laid out for us. God in return will watch over us and take care of us. And we should be able to rest upon that, and resting upon that brings us peace. No one has ever skipped church to study that didn't have anxiety about a test or something else. None of that was alleviated by skipping church. By putting all of these things in God's hands and by living faithfully, the stress and the anxiety of life is alleviated, and we actively put it into God's hands to take care of. And likewise, we utilize the gifts and the things that God has given us, especially as people in the church get older and their lives become more stabilized, to help show this generosity to younger people in the church. And it doesn't all have to be financial. What I mean is the handing on of knowledge, the handing on of love, hospitality, kindness, and interconnectedness within the faith. These are the principles that are laid out today by Christ and shown in the feeding of the people, and we see it emulated in the lives of the saints, particularly all of us who are living in the world and have to interact within the world. This is how we manifest our Christian life. To our God be all glory, honor, and worship, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.